YouTube video or a G+ post or something. And
Yep.
but putting yourself out there on YouTube, it's eternalized, isn't it? There's so you definitely, I think, no one could say that you're chicken. You've definitely got the balls to back up your position, and you fight, on a daily basis. You've got your radio show, you're on Bible Thumping Wingnut, you're going around doing talks and stuff. So I mean, no matter how much you disagree with you, I don't think anyone could lay the charge of you being chicken.
Not chicken.
No, I also certainly don't think that you're a troll. I don't think that you're doing this insincerely.
No.
And I do think that there are people out there who use the presup routine, and they are just trolling. Really, they're just interested in shutting other people up. Whereas I think that it's fair to say, I mean, please correct me if I go wrong, but I think you're of the view that there is a sort of intellectual defense of Christianity that you're trying to put forward. It's not just a way of winning a debate and shutting other people up or trying to look clever. I think you actually do think that there's a case to be made, and that's genuine. So I think you're not chicken, not a troll. And I also don't think that you're stupid either. I mean, I think you're obviously bright, because you've got a very detailed knowledge of, for instance, the knowledge of the Bible. Presumably you can read it in different languages, Hebrew or whatever, something Greek.
Rusty, but I can do Greek, yeah.
Okay, sure. I mean, like, anyone who's trying to say that you're stupid it's just wrong. So okay, so somebody's just joined the Hangout. I don't know how.
I emailed him. He said it was okay. He's a friend of mine. He's not going to jump on you. He's not here for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. All right, fair enough.
He's mentally challenged, but he left. I want to see when he was here. That way he can hear the insult.
So yeah, I just wanted to say those things to begin with before we go any further.
No, I appreciate that.
Put my cards on the table.
Well, I can return a favor. I've already told you before. You're not a malicious anti-Christian guy, which is polite. And some of the conversation we had before this went on live, I appreciate that. So hey, you're always welcome over here at my place. You ever come over?
I'm not often in that part of the world, but yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get down to business then. So we had a chat in January on Bible Thumping Wingnut show.
Right. January, really? Wow.
Yeah, I know. And that was, well, I'd gone on there because I was a listener to the podcast anyway. I was doing a job at the time where I was listening to stuff all day. And there'd been an episode where you'd had a back and forth with some caller, and there'd been some statement about logic, and the guy had challenged you and said, "Oh, but I don't have any training in logic, so I can't explain this. But I wish someone who did would go on so that he could talk to you in place of me." And then I was listening to that cycling home, and I thought, well, I do have this idea, so I'll get in touch with Tim and see what he says. And I sent him the blog post that I'd written, and he was like, "Yeah, come on." And so you had a chance to read it beforehand, but I think you hadn't had very. Well, you said you had, and you talked about it. Yeah. So you
remember.
You had read it before, but not very long before. I think only about half an hour beforehand or something.
But I don't recall it at all now. So
okay. So well, I was wondering whether. Okay, so I was wondering what you'd taken away from the conversation, how you think about it.
Oh, yeah. What I took away from the conversation was, and I thought about it later, was you have God or not God, and if not God, double negative means God. So actually, it's God or God, which is a tautologist statement. That was the basic thing you're saying, right?
That's close to it. But yeah, that kind of captures the idea that the argument sort of turns into something that's tautologist. Yes, that's right.
Right. Okay. Well, I've thought about that over the past few months, and I can see the logic in that. And I am okay. And I still believe the tag argument's quite valid and powerful. I don't believe that let's just call it And you can understand, you know a lot more about philosophy and stuff like that than I do. So if I misspeak, you can correct me and say that's not the right way to say it. That's fine with me. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. But I don't know if God or not God, in the sense that you're talking about, is the same sense of which I was talking about.
Hmm.
Because how I understand it, it's like saying we have non-naturalism and naturalism. Now go back to risking the idea of tautology, but you know, God's either involved in the universe or it's not the case that God's involved in the universe. I mean, that's it. And you can't negate both as explanatory options because there's only two options. And so, you know, transcendentals, for example, well, they have their, let's just call them existence, leave that vague term out for now. But how do you account for them? Well, it's either you can do it with the worldview that includes God or a worldview that excludes God. Well, you know, how do you do that? You can't have both. Well, maybe I wouldn't say you can't have both, but if one's negated, logically, the other one must be the case. Now, I have see no problem with these logical statements. So the right way to word all that is the issue. I think that's what we're talking about here. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do, but I object to this strategy on different levels. So on the one hand, it seems to me that there's some kind of I can't quite how to say it, but there's some kind of like, yes, obviously God either exists or, you know, some particular,
Right.
let's just say God and assume it's like a proper name that picks out Jehovah or something like that. So either that God exists or he doesn't. That's obviously a tautology. No one's going to argue with that. But then there's this extra layer of
He exists or does not exist. That's not
yeah,
a tautology.
it's a tautology because it's either P or not P, and that's true by definition.
Well, I thought a tautology was saying the same thing different ways.
No, tautology is in logic. A tautology is a sentence that's true in virtue of its form. So P or not P is true regardless of what P is. So P could be God exists, or it could be I like ice cream, or something like that. But
that's called a tautology?
A tautology is a statement that's true regardless of the truth value of the propositions that make it up.
Okay, I didn't know that in that respect.
And a contradiction is like the opposite of that. It's where it's a sentence that's false regardless of the truth value of the propositions that make it up.
So it wouldn't be P or not P, it'd be P or
P and not P, say.
P and not P. Okay.
That would be a contradiction, and that's false.
Oh yeah, that would be a contradiction.
Right.
But tautology would be P or not P.
That's right. And there's other tautologies. Anything that you can prove. So if P, then P. That's a tautology as well. And there's other ones.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. I get you. I see what you're saying, because that's what I was thinking tautology would be. If P, then P.
Yeah. Right. So it's true by definition, a tautology. So obviously either God exists or it's not the case that God exists.
You'd agree that's true?
Yeah, I agree that that's true.
Okay.
But I don't think that you can say that it has to be that one of those two things explains some given other phenomenon, right? So for instance, if my car's broken down, either I've got 50 in my pocket or I don't. Neither of those things explains why my car broke down, right? They're not necessarily explanatory towards any given phenomenon. And so in some sense, I see that this is saying either God exists or he doesn't. Therefore, either God accounts for the laws of logic or he doesn't. That's not a logical truth.
Actually, I totally agree with you. I mean, it's the first time I really tell anybody that, because most people don't know to think that level what's going on. But I don't know the right way to word things. So that, yeah, I understand. You know, you have 4 quarters in your pocket. You don't have 4 quarters in your pocket, and that explains why your car broke down. You know, I think there might be a way to work through that it could be validated. But I understand what you're saying.
Right.
But
so I think that's obviously wrong, right? And it's not controversial. And I would say that to anybody, whether they agreed with me in some, on the atheism issue or not, it doesn't really make any difference. It's just when it's right, and that's nothing to
Mhm.
It's not partisan. So then it seemed to me that if you, so that is the first form of the argument, where you'd say something like, either God accounts for the laws of logic, or something else accounts for the laws of logic. Right? And that's like, you might say, it's not a dichotomy, but it could be the first premise in your argument, because you'd been saying before that your argument was a disjunctive syllogism. I mean, I didn't pin that on you. That was how you've been describing it. Disjunctive syllogism has, the first premise is either, well, it's a disjunction. The first premise is P or Q, right? So if you have this, the first premise, either God accounts for logic or something else accounts for logic. And then the second premise of a disjunctive syllogism is that you negate one of those two options that you had in the first premise, right? So I see sort of, I think what you, way that you want to argue is, you want to say either God accounts for transcendental laws of logic or something else does. And then you say, well, what could that other thing be, right? Could it be that logic is, and this is all a bit murky, because we haven't really made any kind of rigorous definition of what we mean by accounting for logic. But let's say it means, I take it means something like a metaphysical basis. So like, I think this is the Van Til idea anyway, that there's something like, the idea anyway, basically, is on an atheist view, all there is particles bouncing around in a void or something. And if that's all you've got, the resources of your metaphysics, you don't allow any other entities at all, then how could you have this like sort of immaterial thing called a law of logic? And that's basically the conundrum for the atheist.
Right.
And so your basic idea is, you've got a position over here which has got God and therefore other kind of transcendental objects or something. It's okay to have those things here, but the atheist is a guy who says science only, material particles only, or something, and then he's lacking some kind of metaphysical richness, which he needs in order to say things like arguments, because they rely on transcendental objects like laws of logic or something. That's basically what you're trying to say, isn't it? It's a sort of metaphysical argument.
Worldview including God, a worldview excluding God. Because I've thought about this, because we're going to blab, and I thought, okay, what's the right way to say what I mean? And I can't come up with the exact right way. See, I think generically, I think the argument's sound. I do, but I'm not a logician like that. So what's the right way to word it? Which I have no problem learning the right way to word it, because to me it seems logical. You have a worldview, which is an intellectual position with parameters and assumptions, that when it includes God and when it doesn't include God. And I think that I hope you would agree that's a true dichotomy: a worldview with, a worldview without God.
I guess so. Can we be more clear on what a worldview is in your view? Like, what do you mean by worldview?
A set of assumptions that do not necessarily are not necessarily subject to validation, but must be assumed, and from which we work in order to interpret our world around us.
Okay, so a worldview is, so Banson says a worldview is a network of presuppositions.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the question is, what's a presupposition? But what you're saying, I think, has already given some clue to what you mean by that. So it's something that you believe that isn't necessarily justified by other things that you believe.
May or may not be. So a Christian worldview, I get exemplify it. You have an atheist position. I'm a Christian, so I'm only going to defend the Christian God. Okay, so I would interpret overly simplistic, this coffee cup's existence, what caused it, what caused that. Ultimately, cosmological, I'd say, well, God did, from a Christian perspective. But an atheist would more or less, not to be overly banal in my representation, but no, it was formed by random chance out of the Big Bang. Sorry, here's noise at the garage door opened up, and the only ones who ever open up my garage door are my wife and me. I just dropped her off at the airport, and the garage door just opened.
Do you want to check your garage door then?
I did, but I go, wait a minute, I forgot. I got a buddy here, and he likes to fix things at the house. So that's why I got distracted, not trying to. But so if you see me look away like this for a second, I'm not used to the noises that will be going on.
We're going to get
That's
a lot
why.
more views if you get robbed on air, I've got to say.
Well, well, I can get my AK-47 out and show you if you want, and see, you know. But okay, I'm sorry, I distracted myself with that noise.
Okay, so look, the question was,
yeah.
What is it that you mean when you say worldview?
Yeah.
And so one of the things you said was that it's about, it seems to be it's something about a set of things that you believe. It's not just a set of things that you believe. It's a special, like the Banton idea, it's a network of presupposition. So, for instance, I believe that this is a glass of beer, right? But that belief is not a presupposition. It's a belief that I formed on the basis of the experiences that I'm having.
Right.
Informed by that, there is justification for that, right? But
Absolutely.
you might say that my belief that the universe wasn't created 30 seconds ago with me having memories of the last 34
Hopefully
years
not.
stuff, right? But my belief that that isn't the case is a presupposition because it's not supported by the evidence. All the evidence, obviously, would be exactly the same on either hypothesis that the universe really has existed in the past, or it just looks like it has done, right? So I just presuppose that it really does, that really did exist beforehand. And the difference there is that a presupposition isn't supported by any evidence in particular, and that's
some are, some aren't, I would say.
Okay, so sometimes a presupposition is supported by evidence.
Yeah, I would say though. Oh yeah.
Can you give me an example of one then that you mean, just so I can get clear on it?
Well, the Bible. Well, here's something that's subjective. I had an experience of God's presence once. We could talk about it sometime. Profoundly real, and so that can't be validated, cannot be transferred, cannot be tested. It's purely experiential, and yet it is the basis of a very profound belief. So I don't know if that would qualify in that, um, but then there's some evidence. The evidence is my personal experience. Now, for anybody who's watching this, I'm not saying that proves God. I'm not saying that. It's just a personal thing.
So I'm not quite sure why that counts as a presupposition. What are you presupposing that God was responsible for you having that experience?
Well, that's the thing. It's kind of a circle because it's a singular it's a unique event in my life. Period, and nothing comes close to it. It is so completely holy, completely other and different. So I'll just talk as though, well, it was God. It was Him. But how do I know? Only thing I can tell you is I knew. It just was. Well, how do you validate that? I can't. But then how do you know, Matt? It just was. Well, how do you know? But He was. And that's what it comes down to. And I tell people, you had the same experience, you'd be sitting here. Okay, it's just that profound. So how do you validate that? Well, I can't, but I'm assuming it was God. How do I know? Because it was. But how do I know that? Because it was. So you see, it's kind of presuppositional. It's close, but not exactly. But you see what I'm saying? Yeah, I know.
Well, so I mean, another way of thinking about this is that what's presupposed is something that so if I say something like, and here's an example from the philosophy literature on presupposition, because in philosophy of language, presupposition is a linguistic thing, right? A sentence presupposes another sentence. So if you say something like, I think the example is the knave stole all of the tarts, right? Now, that sentence has various presuppositions. It presupposes that there is a knave, for instance, presupposes that the knave did something wrong, etc., etc. Right? So the presupposition is something that, if some sentence is true, it's a bit like implication. It's a bit like if this sentence is true, it implies that another sentence is true. Right. So
which has certain presuppositions in all of it. Yes.
Yeah. So that works differently to presupposition in the belief case, because I think with this presuppositional apologetic stuff, it's not about just saying, well, in some sense, I don't know, I'm kind of unclear about this. Is the argument that when you say, like, this glass has got beer in it, that that sentence presupposes that God exists, in the same way that if you say the knave stole all of the tarts, that presupposes that there's a knave. I mean, is that
Only,
supposed to be?
I would say only in the sense that we're building on the actuality, the transcendental laws of logic and law of identity, and we're able to think and things like that, which can only be, and I would still assert this, only be rationally accounted for from a Christian worldview, where an atheist worldview cannot, because to reduce this, the idea of mere chemical reactions working in the brain from an atheistic perspective is ultimately self-refuting as a means of discovering truth, because you can't know if your chemical reactions are producing truth. Therefore, it leads to subjectivity, or not subjectivity, let's say. It doesn't provide the means of knowing truth. It's just chemical reactions. And so different worldviews have different strengths and weaknesses. And the worldview of the Christian, I would say, ultimately behind everything, it makes sense when God is presupposed. But when God is not presupposed, then nothing ultimately can make sense. That's a rough form of it, but it's pretty good.
So presupposition in that case means if I believe X, then such and such like makes sense, right? If it's
Yeah.
like
It's like, think of evolution. You got there and you see all these fossils. Well, you presuppose that things evolved. Well, the presupposition suits and fits the evidence. So, unless something else comes along, or this is just generic, you go, yeah, it works. Is it true? Maybe, maybe not, but it works. Now, is that right? That's another issue with pragmatism.
That's not a case of presupposition, because if I examine the evidence of say if I dig up some fossils or something, I can frame a hypothesis that, well, what's the hypothesis in this case? That these are really old animals or something that died millions of years ago. That's my hypothesis, something like that. I'm not presupposing that that's true. It may be that this is evidence that supports that hypothesis. It may be that it's not.
Right.
But you can't know that just by looking at these bones on their own.
Let me change my thing to, then let's hypothesize God is the thing there. Same thing. Then it works. Presuppositionalism works that way. Let's presuppose, let's hypothesize God is behind this. Does everything work? Wow, everything works.
Okay, I see. Okay, right. So let's run with it being that then. So first of all, why? Let's say I take the position of the atheist for the sake of the argument. Then, and we say if you believe that God exists, then you can make sense out of there being laws of logic and whatnot. But if you don't believe that God exists, then laws of logic don't make any sense at all.
Right.
Okay, so
can't be accounted for. There's no basis by which they can be justified as having their universality, continuity, etc. But yeah.
But so when we talked before, I outlined various different proposals that are kind of metaphysical foundations, that ways that you might account for logic in terms of like what is logic, or what's its sort of ontology. And one of them was to say the sort of Platonist view, which is that there are these like timeless entities that play this role somehow, like the way that numbers do in sort of Platonist philosophy of maths. So they're abstract objects. They're not physical things. They're not. You can't pick them up and look at them. Can't weigh them or do anything like that. But there's no reason why an atheist can't believe in those things, right? So why is it that the atheist can't help himself to that ontology and have at least a metaphysical account for logic? Why does it have to be God?
Because I would say that the laws of logic are, as you said, they're abstractions. If I'm quoting you correctly, they're abstractions. Abstractions require mind.
Why is that?
Because that's the definition of an abstraction. It's a thought. It's a contemplation.
Well, but what we're doing here is we're setting out rival ontological pictures of what a law of logic might be. And if I say it's an abstract object, I'm not saying that it's a thought. You're saying it's a thought, but that's just not my position. You can't say, well, I mean, well, you could just say, well, it is, But that, now we're just grinding to a halt. Like,
Okay, so what would you say? What would you say it is then?
Well, I'm just saying that I could say it's an abstract object, and by abstract object, what I mean is it's not a thought. It's not something that anybody's thinking. It exists not as part of the physical world. So this view isn't available to the naturalist, strictly speaking, right? The kind of the typical view.
This invalidates naturalism then.
Sure, this view is a non-naturalistic view. We believe in the naturalistic world, but in addition to that, we have this timeless world, and it's populated by non-changing entities like numbers, laws of logic, what have you, like justice, truth, beauty, whatever things you want.
These are all abstractions.
Well, they're not thoughts, though, on this view.
Well, that's the thing, is I know that they are and they aren't, because one of the things I'll do with an atheist, I'll say, look, you and I are sitting on a park bench discussing this stuff, and we, 500 feet away across the park in our great vision, we were able to see, 200 feet away, whatever, a perpetrator jump on a woman, beat her up really fast, take her purse, kick her while she's down, and run away. We're already running to stop this guy, but he gets away. Is that an injustice? It's an injustice. A year later, you and I are on the other side of the planet in another park, another country talking. Same thing happens. He gets away. We don't get to her in time. Is that an injustice? Yes. The injustice is a principle that we both recognize that's not dependent on where we are or when we are. This side of the planet, that side of the planet, a year ago, a year later. And there's this idea of justice. We would say there's an injustice. Well, that injustice, we don't, you and I politely disagree and would say, not that you would do this, well, I believe injustice is going to be found under that rock. Well, let's go find it. You're not going to do that, of course. But just to illustrate, well, injustice is not found under a rock. And I say, no, it's up in the sky behind the cloud. You go, that's ridiculous. It's just there, it's of the mind, this injustice. If we just see this action occur, why is it wrong? Why is it an injustice? It's an injustice because there's a moral value. Why is there a moral value? Morality is internalized. Morality is an abstraction. It's a contemplation. It's a meaning. I don't have all the right words for it, but that's what it is. We're recognizing there's something that's not just a physical set of chemical reactions. If you and I are just chemical reactionists, hey, look at that chemical reaction upon that female chemical reaction person. There's no value. It's like two robots sitting observing. They don't have morality. They're just machines. There's nothing. You see what I'm saying? For example, in justice, there's something besides that, and it's an abstraction.
But the Platonist agrees that they're not just machines. They're one action. We're now talking about justice, or the bag of chemicals and bone and whatever, this like organic machine that robs another one, exemplifies the Platonic object of injustice or something.
Right.
So on the Platonist view, they have an account for that. They say, yes, the reason why it's wrong in both of those situations is because in each of those things exemplifies the non-spatially located abstract object of, in this case, injustice, right? That exists. Like, so when if you have like the numbers, right? So if I write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up on a chalkboard, and then I say, this is number 2, isn't it? Right, pointing at 2. Yes, it is. And then I rub off number 2. Right, number 2's gone. Right, but number 2, if I rubbed off all the number 2s off every chalkboard everywhere, got rid of all of the representations of 2, I wouldn't have 2-ness itself isn't affected by that, right? All that is that these signs, the symbols, instantiate 2, which is an abstract object. So for a Platonist, they take that talk seriously and they say, yes, 2-ness exists nowhere and at no time. It's an abstract. It's an abstract object. Doesn't mean a thought. It means not a physical thing, like existing, but not as a physical thing, not in a place and not at a time. A bit like the way that God exists, right? God doesn't exist at a particular place or a particular time. So I don't see an argument here that says that what's wrong with that. I mean, there are arguments against Platonism, of course, but there are arguments against every philosophical position. I'm just wondering why. Is there any particular reason why? Like, I understand to some extent the view that if you're a very harsh reductionist naturalist who says all there is matter, and they've got kind of difficult pitch to sell you how to
Yes.
explain all of these things, right? Okay, but that's not the only type of atheist, of course. So as an argument against atheism, just arguing against a materialist doesn't seem to be a great strategy. Even if you won, you haven't said anything against the Platonist atheist or all of the other different types of atheists out there.
Well, that's the problem, is atheism is fractured in that there's so many views and sub-views inside of philosophical things. Unfortunately, from my perspective, I have to know Roman Catholicism as well as the Catholics, Mormonism as well as the Mormons, philosophy as well as philosophy PhDs. And it becomes obvious at times. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm out of my league in this particular area. And it's just what it is. But I'm supposed to know everything. And when I get mocked when I don't know everything by atheists, oh, you don't know this? Sorry, I'm not omniscient. Thank you for thinking that I am, but I'm not. So we get into these issues, and all I can do is apply my intelligence, my knowledge, my expertise in these areas. And with meeting people like you, I value, because you can hone, even though we disagree. And I love talking to people who disagree with me, who are polite, who are intelligent, who are educated. I very much like that. And they can say, well, Matt, that's correct, but that's not correct. This is correct. Like, I don't have any problem with that from an unbeliever. No disrespect meant. So no big deal. But I'm at a disadvantage to some degree because of the scope of the things I'm supposed to know is vast.
Right.
And I'm supposed to be good at all of it. So it's just not
there's
possible.
the limitations that you face as a finite person having to argue against all of these different positions, which I sympathize with, because everybody's in that boat, right? Nobody can know all of the answers to everything. But there's a difference between being in that boat and don't you make it worse for yourself when you make a claim like only the Christian worldview can account for something? Because then you have to, you've pitted yourself against everybody now.
Yep, that's correct. And I will continue to do that. Yes.
But if you make that claim, but then you don't, then you have to run through each of these. So I mean, it seems to me that I wouldn't make that claim unless I knew how to run through all of the different, or if I had a knockdown argument that worked for everyone. I've never heard this knockdown argument that works, because I hear an argument against a materialist here, which, even if I concede it, seems to me you've only knocked out a very small subsection of all of the different worldviews you should be arguing against. And there should be one knockdown argument. I've never heard that argument.
I don't think it is one knockdown argument. Even in the Bible, different arguments are used in different situations for different things. The ultimate knockdown argument is God opens the heavens and he reveals himself to you. And there's no counter to that. That's what happened to me. That's what happened. It wasn't a, Monty Python clouds opening thing. It was like that. It was the same effect. Now, I'm not trying to convince you of it. I wish you would believe. And I'm not using that as the knockdown argument, because it's subjective. But that is it. When he reveals himself, it's going to happen. Okay, but that's
fine.
That's
so
later.
That's why you have your belief, and that's okay.
That's
I mean, I'm not I'm not trying to talk you out of it either.
No, that's okay.
But what I am saying is that part of the presuppositional argument, part of your presuppositional argument, seems to me, is that it built within it is a claim that only the Christian worldview can account for such and such.
And
that seems to be a wildly ambitious claim, because
yes, it is.
You may be convinced that God existed, but he didn't come down and tell you that only the Christian worldview accounts for logic when he came down, presumably. And so why do you think that only the Christian worldview accounts for logic?
2 Corinthians 5:10 says that we Christians are going to hold every thought captive, laying down the strongholds. There's a theological perspective that states that this is the case. Just because I can't argue every single thing, as an atheist might say, doesn't mean that it's not out there. But I want to get back to you on something, because I have a question, and we'll get too far away. I want to put it in the text here. I'm going to put some X's.
Whilst you're doing that, I'm going to pour out a little bit more of this lovely beer that my friend Bert sent me from America.
Hey, that's obviously a Presbyterian beer.
Why do you say that?
Has the word elder, which is presbyteros in Greek.
It's Pliny the Elder, who was a Roman naturalist. So he predates your...
I wasn't looking at the word Pliny, but you're right. He was.
Yeah.
So it can't be what I look at the word elder, but you're right. Pliny the Elder. Okay, so look in there. What is the essence of the non-spatially located objects in Platonic thought?
What is the essence? Well, so by essence, so essence is one of these terms. So you're asking me the ontological category that they fit into, right? So I'm not committed to Platonism in the sense that you're committed to Christianity, right? I'm not really committed to any metaphysical position in that way. So I'll explain it the best that I can, but I'm not going to be
best you can.
I'm not going to own any of these metaphysical positions. Well, so a Platonist might say something like, so the question precisely is, so you said, what's the essence? I mean, an essence is a term that means something quite specific in metaphysics. It's something like the properties that an object has to have, lest it be a different object. So it's sort of the properties that
properties,
its identity.
but properties emanate out of the ontos. Properties reflect the ontos. So if we're going to have Platonic thoughts, this is something I thought a lot about. What's the essence of the Platonic thought? And what I assume Platonists, generically sweeping them all under one rug, is that they don't know what they're talking about if they can't define what these abstract, non-spatially located objects really are. They just say that they exist. But if they say they just exist, then I can just use the same argument and say, well, God exists. Now what do we do?
Well, you can do that. That's not a counter argument. That's fine. When you're doing metaphysics, you don't have to. The whole point of it, if it was, well, part of the distinguishing feature between physics and metaphysics is the need for evidence, really. So you don't actually have to be able to produce a Platonic object. The point is that we're just saying, what would the consequences be of believing this thing? Right?
Yeah, that's one thing. How about what are some of the properties of these non-spatially located objects?
Okay, so the big problem for the Platonist is explaining how an object that's so distinct from the comings and goings of the things in the world actually has any relation to them at all. Like, in what sense is it that things in the world instantiate numbers? It's all very well to say that they do, but if this thing is not part of the world in any way, how is it that it does that? So that's the metaphysical.
Right, there's a conundrum.
Yeah, and there's an epistemological part of it as well, because if they're so removed from the comings and goings of the world, how is it that you can ever come to know anything about them? Right?
Exactly.
So both of these problems are the key problems for the Platonist, and it's these go back to a paper by this guy called Paul Banasaraf. He wrote a paper in, I don't know, something like this.
What's his last name?
Banasaraf. I'll send you the paper. It's
okay. Thank you.
So
because the thing is, the way I think, properties emanate out of an object, to be basic.
Okay.
If they can't describe the properties of these non-spatially located objects, they can't describe them, then they can't say that they exist.
Well, you can say that. So let's take number 2, for instance. It's divisible by itself, right?
A what?
The number 2.
Oh, yes.
One of its properties is that it's divisible by itself.
Then you can describe it, yes.
Right, but as a Platonist can say that that's true of the abstract object. Right? So it does have properties.
Give me an example of it. But that is an abstract object, the number 2.
Yeah, and it can have properties. There's no worry about saying that, I can't say any properties about it. I can say properties, but I can say that, it's mathematical properties. I can also say things like it doesn't change. Nothing can happen that can change the number 2, right? And it's
how is it though, before I lose my thought, that the number 2 divisible by itself isn't just a tautologist statement about a necessary truth that the number 2 qualifies as already having? They're not saying anything. They're not saying anything new other than it's divisible by itself. Yeah, okay, so what? It's a logical truth.
That's true. I picked a property that was tautologous, that it's an even number then.
Yeah, like the
Maybe all mathematical truths are tautologies. That's
right.
possible. But
if it's tautologous, then I would say, if it's tautologous and the Platonist wants to say, well, I'm going to argue from a tautologous position that I can't demonstrate what the objects are. I'm going to give you properties which are ultimately self-defined as what they are by definition. He's not giving me anything. He's just saying blue is blue. How do you know it's blue? Because it's blue. It doesn't do anything. This is why I think Platonism falls on its rear. If the abstractions don't have any temporality, don't have any properties that can be described properly that aren't tautologous, then they should give up the idea of positing this. Because at least in Christianity, we could say God is holy, God is this, as properties.
But
sorry, go ahead.
It's only due to the fact that we picked a mathematical object that it's even plausible that any property that you pick for it, a mathematical property, is tautologous.
How about chairness?
Yeah, exactly. So chairness. Well, I don't know what you would say about chairness. In a sense, it's not really a problem for the Platonist in principle, because all he has to say is that there are abstract objects. Which abstract objects there are isn't necessarily something that he has to worry about. Like, what is chairness? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's a bit like this. Maybe it's a bit like that. That's not an objection to Platonism, just that he can't pin down what chairness is. What he will say about Platonism is something like, as I was doing before, you kind of define them in some sense negatively. So the distinguishing features about an abstract object is that it's not the same as a physical object. It doesn't perish. It doesn't come into existence. It doesn't, I don't know, it's not located at a particular location.
Right, like a point.
Right, and also, I suppose, obviously, it has to be the sort of thing that's capable of being instantiated by those fleeting coming and going things in the real world. So if I line up three beings, then they, in some sense, instantiate threeness somehow, right? Well, it is mysterious how that happens. Yes, I'm not. One of the reasons why I'm not convinced by Platonism or really any metaphysical position, I wouldn't stake my life on any of these things, right? But to say that, okay, so there's some mystery involved in that. If we're hopping over the other side of the fence, though, comparing, it would be ludicrous to say that there's no mystery involved in the nature of the Trinity, for instance.
Correct.
So there's mystery on both sides.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, what value, how far do you get? You presumably don't see that the mystery involved in the Trinity is any kind of defeater for your Christian view.
Yeah,
so
there's nothing self-refuting in it. It may be paradoxical, but it's not self-refuting.
Okay, so why bring it up in the case of Platonism then, as an objection? It's a bit weird, isn't it? But yeah, okay, it is.
I don't know.
It's what it's like.
I've thought about this because it seems to me that chairness, for an example, is an abstraction. If I go to your house in England, you're in England.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a chair like that, different, but it's chair. We see instances of Platonic norms. We should get back on a tag thing anyway, but I see instances of it, and the Platonists would just say there's the perfect chairness existing in the ethereal Platonist universe out there someplace, and we somehow become in contact with this and recognize these things. Because that's what Plato was trying to figure out, and how we can recognize these transcendentals. I call it this. You may get a kick out of this. I want to write an article called "Bumping into Transcendentals." It's not a very accurate title, but it's a catchy title because here's cupness, you have beardness, and the Dave has ugliness, in the room there, and stuff like that. So, and he manifests anyway. So we have these but they're concepts. See, this is it's a physical object, but it also has conceptuality associated with it. You recognize it, but you recognize it in your mind. If there are no minds, this isn't a cup. If there are no minds, it's just a structure. It becomes cup when we assign a value to it, and we could recognize it across temporal boundaries, here or there. This is what I think about. Who can I talk to about? I can't talk to anybody about this kind of stuff.
But what are you saying then, that that the cup doesn't exist unless it's being thought about by somebody?
No. The object exists, but is it a cup?
Well, what do you mean by cup then, when you say it's a cup?
Meaning requires a mind. So the meaning then, as soon as we instantiate the idea of cupness to an object, then it requires abstraction. To me, this is the necessary
Well,
precondition for the validity of Platonism.
look, if I say the cup is round, or I don't know, it's
By
a
definition.
circular object that can contain water, it seems to me that that property doesn't require anyone to think about it for it to be the case. So what qualifies the truth conditions for it being a cup don't need me to be there thinking about it for it to be true or not. Whereas if I say something like, I don't know if this is a great example, but just because I'm trying to think off the top of my head, I might say something like, for you to be married does require there to be somebody there, because being married means somebody saying, someone with the right authority, you know, part of a religious organization or something, at the right time in the right part of the ceremony, saying to the right person that you're married. And if they don't do that, then that property doesn't, you know, that property, being married, does require there to be minds in order for it to exist. But being a cup, if it's just defined in terms of it being a certain shape and being able to hold water, it doesn't seem to me that it needs anybody to be there for it to be true of the cup. So I'd see a distinction between those types of properties. Some of them are mind dependent and some of them are not.
Let's see if I can illustrate it a different way. And I'm probably going to fumble through this and not do a good job. So mind experiment. We have a carbon sphere. It's perfectly spherical, and it's pure carbon-12. This is okay. But it's the only thing that exists in the universe.
Right.
The only thing. Is it big or is it small?
I don't see how there's an answer to that.
Exactly, because that has to relate to something else. So smallness and bigness have no meaning in that situation. So here's another thing.
Well, no, hold on. Before we move on, that might be true for smallness and bigness, but is it true for it being spherical? I think that it obviously is spherical.
But I didn't say spherical. I didn't say, is it big or small? That way, you know, I just
Yeah,
gave an
okay.
object.
I
And
might
is it
grant
big or
you
small?
that big and small, in some sense, are like sort of context-specific value judgments, right? But being spherical isn't like that. So
Right, I agree.
Jumping into the distinction between there being some properties that are mind-dependent and some that are not. So if you just say properties imply a mind, I'll say only the mind-dependent ones, not the mind-independent ones.
Okay. Yeah,
Right?
so bigness and
Shape,
smallness do.
possibly, but shape certainly seems to be a clear example of a property that doesn't depend on a mind.
Okay.
Right?
So, right, I'm with you, no problem. But that's why I said big and small, not spherical. Because big and small have to do with a relationship to something else at another standard. Requires abstractions, mental things. Now, a sphere is nothing more than a physical shape. Has volume, nothing more. So here's a game. If that sphere, carbon sphere, is the only thing in the universe and there are no minds, is it true that it's the only thing in the universe?
Yeah.
But if there are no minds, there can't be any truths.
Why is that?
Because truth is a statement.
No, truth is a property of statements.
So truth obtains its truth value in correspondence. I believe in the correspondence theory. So of correspondence, and it presupposes logic, law of logic, identity, and things like that. So if there are no minds, are there truths? I differentiate between it exists, but we're in this truth-based universe, truth-capable universe, looking back into a universe that has no minds, so we can make a statement about it. But if there are no minds, there are no truths. But we could say from outside, yes, the object exists. But if you're inside, you can't say the object exists because there are no minds.
If you're inside, then you're inside and there is a mind in there, obviously.
If
so
you
what
are,
you're trying to say seems to me doesn't...
So it doesn't work.
No, but I can say from this perspective that it's true. I mean, look, you said...
From outside.
Right, from the... Yeah, because you set it up from the outside. You say, like, imagine a universe with nothing else in it apart from a sphere. Is it a sphere? Yeah, obviously it is, because you just described it as a sphere. And that's true because you made a statement in this world, and that statement is true. And you saying that, well, truth can't exist in the other world is irrelevant because the statement that you said is here. That's what's true. You're confusing whether or not the truth doesn't apply to the object. The sphere isn't true. The statement that you said is true about the sphere. So truth is a property that statements have, or
I would
sentences or
agree.
propositions or something like that, right? Truth is another complicated issue, of course, but
Right.
I don't understand where you're going with this argument.
Well, I would say truth is true when it's true, and I'm purposely saying that way. But this is one of the reasons I think Platonism falls apart, because if we can't imagine this, but a universe with no minds and only a carbon sphere, it's irrelevant of its size because there is no size. It's just volume, but then that has to do with measurement and size. It's all irrelevant. There are no Platonic anythings in that sense. I'm gonna get coffee. I'm gonna get coffee while we're talking. I can still hear everything and talk to you because this goes all over the house.
Good.
Okay, keep
But
going.
what you need to do is pull apart the idea of the sentence, which is the thing that has either being true or false, and the conditions, the truth conditions, the things that have to obtain for that sentence to be true or false, right? So if I say something like, you're making coffee, right, that sentence is true if and only if, right, there's some kind of relationship between the truth of that sentence and certain things happening, like you putting the cup underneath the coffee machine and pressing the button or whatever it is that you do to make coffee.
That's exactly what I'm doing,
right?
man. You got a USB.
Okay, great. So the truth conditions are things happening in the world, and those things themselves are neither true nor false. They're just events, they're objects, right? It's wrong. Like Matt Slick isn't true. Matt Slick just is. Whereas the sentence Matt Slick is true because Matt Slick is, right?
Yeah,
You have to
I agree with you.
You have to keep clear in your mind the linguistic element and the truth conditions, right? They relate to each other, and truth is, this is like semantics, what we're doing here.
I agree with you. That's why I said
are not things that are true or false. And to point at, so what you were doing then previously, it seems to me, is you were saying, hey, there's this sentence, there's a golden sphere in a universe all by itself, whatever it was.
Carbon sphere, yeah.
Okay, and you're saying that sentence is true, right? And I say yes. And then you go, aha, but there has to be a mind in that universe. And,
I understand.
What you're doing there is like mistakenly thinking that the truth conditions themselves need to have minds present, and they don't. They just don't.
Well, I trust me. I understand. I've gone through all this, and that's why I said it's difficult to explain. But it's a mind, not a mind game, but it's a thought experiment. That's the right way to say it. The idea, truth requires a mind because it's a statement. It's an oversimplified way of saying it. But if the sphere is the only thing that's there are no minds, there cannot be anything else. It's just that sphere. Now we can look outside, inside, and say, "Well, it's true that it's there." Well, yeah, but just to even recognize that requires a mind. So I just think trying to illustrate is difficult for me to get it out. But I'm trying to illustrate why my view, Platonism, ultimately must presuppose the universality of mind in order for its thought experiments to have any validity, and thereby say chairness, duckness, and whatever else.
No, they don't, because the Platonist is saying something like, the cup is red if and only if, and then they're stating the truth conditions, and the truth conditions is what we're talking about here, that this cup, this physical object, instantiates this abstract object of redness, right? So the cup is red. The sentence, the cup is red, is true if and only if the cup, now we're talking truth conditions, the cup, the thing itself, instantiates redness. And it's no objection to Platonism to say the cup can't instantiate redness unless there's a mind watching it, because that's just not what they say. I mean,
I agree.
So so I'm missing then the force of your argument completely.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, it might be that my thinking just is not good, but sometimes anyways, well, yeah, I agree with you, and I understand that. This is where I believe a lot of the people will come in and say, this is how we can use the same principle on the laws of logic. They'll try and use a Platonic argument where they just say it's the necessary property of its own self, and that's just what it is, the way it is. The difficulty that I have is in the nature of what the abstractions are. Some philosophical positions hold abstractions as being non-spatial, non-mental things. They just exist. And they just say they are. Well, I think there's ways to deal with that. But then what I could do is just say, if we were to use your argument, and an atheist is using this argument, they just exist, then I can say, If I use your logic, I can say, then God just exists.
You can, yeah.
Yeah. So then if your logic is true, then my logic is true, and we're coming up with opposite conclusions.
All right, but you
They
start.
can't both be true.
Let's start with the perspective. The context of that discussion is the person, the presuppositionalist, is saying, "Oh, you have to believe in God to have logic," right? And then the Platonist goes, "Well, no, I have a different metaphysics, Platonist metaphysics, and
Right.
and on that view, I posit different entities, and they play the role that God does on
Right.
yours." And now you're going, well, God does it on mine. And Platonist says Platonic objects do it on mine. But that looks like a stalemate, apart from the fact that we started with you saying that the Platonists couldn't do this. So you have to do more than just say, well, God exists, right? This isn't an atheistic argument. This is an argument, well, the point of positing Platonism is simply as a counterexample to your claim that there couldn't be a theory like Platonism. Because you're saying only the Christian view accounts for logic. But Platonism clearly does account for logic, at least metaphysically, gives some kind of basis for it.
I think they think it does, but here's the thing. So let me run this by you. So to overly reduce it so I can make the point, the atheist Platonist is arguing with me, the presuppositional Calvinist Christian. And so he's saying, and I'm going to take both positives. He's saying, no, God doesn't exist. Tag is invalid because we can account for this. I'll say, no, your view is invalid because only God can account. Okay, so we had this opposing thing. And then it comes down to, well, I can presuppose the Platonists, I can presuppose the validity of these non-spatial, non-temporal abstractions.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say, and I presuppose that God, okay, so then by each using the same logic, they contradict each other. There's a problem there. When the same logic is used in the same worldviews and they arrive at opposite conclusions, then there is a logical problem, because you can't say that both are equally valid if they're contradicting each other, and you can't say both are true because they're contradicting each other. That violates the law of non-contradiction, which you both presuppose is true.
Well, I'm not sure that Platonism and theism are in contradiction at all, and I think it seems perfectly clear that I'm actually not quite clear how you could have a theistic answer that isn't actually the Platonistic answer in disguise. Anyway, it seems to me that they're not only are they not in contradiction with each other, but the theist is really the Platonist, wrapping it up with a bunch of other properties. So what I mean is, if you say, well, the ontological basis for the laws of logic is somehow grounded in God's existence, something like that. I presume that's basically what you're saying on the like what right. We spent a lot of time talking about what Platonism is, but well, okay, let me sketch this out, and then you can just tell me what you actually think. But here's a view anyway. But the theist who wants to say, oh, my metaphysics is has the answers here, and he says there's this immaterial, non-spatiotemporal thing that created the universe and has like immense power, and made the universe as a kind of moral test for all of us to go through, something like that. And then they say, well, when you refer to the law of non-contradiction or something, what you're referring to is an immaterial entity, and that's actually part of God. You're actually referring to a part of God's essence there. And it seems to me that what you've done is, it's like God's got these various compartments within him, and there's his power or something, his ability to create the world, his justice, his the kind of logical manifestation. That then there's the numbers bit or whatever. And actually, what we've done is we've just said these are all Platonic objects. I mean, that's exactly what so in what sense does the law of non-contradiction relate to God, if not in exactly the same way that the law of non-contradiction relates to the abstract object, the law of non-contradiction? It's exactly the same answer. So it seems to me that the Platonist isn't in contradiction to the theist, apart from when the theist says the law of non-contradiction actually cares about me, sent his son down to die, and blah blah blah, and they're just adding other properties on, but they're not really disagreeing with the Platonist about the job that like immaterial entity plays in relation to me saying things. I mean, it seems that they're actually saying the same thing.
Yeah, but I could equally say the Platonist is borrowing from the Christian worldview, and he is an incomplete Christian. It says he could, you posited that they could say that that the Christian is a subset of Platonism, I can say Platonism is a subset of Christianity that way. Who's going to be true? We have, from the Christian perspective, a non-spatial temporal being who is able to communicate these abstract entities to us because they are abstract entities, these laws of logic. They exist.
Well, yeah, okay. So I had the Banasaraf problem a moment ago, which is if there's an abstract entity that's so removed from the coming and going world of the temporal things down here, how is it that I can know about it? Well, you've got the same problem then. Like, how is it that God, if he's unchanging, can actually say anything to you? And the only answer that you go is, well, there's this Trinity and there's this like mysterious incarnation. And
call it incarnation.
Okay, yeah. So just slap a label on it, and we'll just all say
but it works.
Well, you can't explain how that works, though, can you? Just say that it works.
Well, not how, because I don't know how God could do what he could do. But
exactly. So then it's not an explanation. It's just slapping a label on it. So if I say that the law of non-contradiction is instantiated, but I don't know how, that's not an explanation either. But we're equal there. We're doing the same thing.
To an extent, except then I would just jump in to the issue of, yeah, but we have eyewitness accounts of the resurrection, et cetera, and go into these things and say, now explain it from your perspective, explain it from your worldview. Then we're kind of jumping ship out of presuppositionalism to an evidential. Now, I'm a presuppositionalist, but I have no problem with using evidence as well, just as Jesus did. He said, see my hands, my feet after the resurrection, now believe. He actually commanded belief upon seeing the evidence. A lot of presuppositionalists don't like that idea. And there's some theological perspectives. But nevertheless, I like Platonic thought, the issue of duckness. We see instances of this, instances of that. What I'm curious to know about, which we're not able to deal with in a Platonistic worldview, what is the essence of these temporal, non-spatial related things, objects? Well, how do you describe what the essence of humanity is? I don't know what that is. Is it blue? Is it triangular? Is it circular? It doesn't make any sense. These are non sequiturs. We observe the ontos through the properties. What are the properties of these things, and do their properties then require mind?
Look,
these are the questions I have.
If you're asking about the essence, so look, here's this glass, right? And it has properties, and one of those properties is at the moment it's about 2/3 full, but that property isn't an essential property of the glass.
It's incidental, accidental.
It's an accidental property of the glass, right? And so the distinction between the essential and accidental properties is, and this is notoriously difficult to cash out in a completely non-controversial way, right? But it's roughly the idea that an accidental property can change without the glass stopping being the glass, right? So it can be empty and it's still the glass. It can be full, it's still the glass. But if I don't know, if I replace every part of it with a bit of wood or something, then it stops being the glass. So in some sense, its composition, in this case at least, is
by definition, right?
Yeah. Well, it's difficult to see in every case how this works. But so I could, I don't know, I could inherit loads of money and then I could lose it again and still be me. So obviously having that property isn't an essential property to me. But being human in some sense is. If I became a dog, you might say, well, that's just no longer Alex anymore, right? The humanity was part of its essence, and that's changed. So if we don't, that's what essence means in philosophy. It's that type of distinction. And you ask me what the essence of a Platonic object is. I'm not really sure that they have any accidental properties, right? So the number 2, for instance, doesn't have. So I can just tell you properties about it, but it seems a bit redundant to ask me what the essential properties of it are.
Yeah, well, that's the problem, and I recognize that. That's why you determine the essence, so to speak, by the properties. How do I know that's a bowling ball? It's round. There's 3 holes in it. We're in a bowling alley. You know, that's accidental, but you know we could recognize it. And dang it, darn glasses.
No. The essential properties are not linked to us being able to identify it. So I might not be able to. So I don't know. Take
Yeah, I agree with you. No, I agree with you.
So that's confusing a kind
Someone
of.
Someone might not know what it is. Right. Someone might not know that's. Man, what is up with this? Someone might not know that that's what it is, but it still has its essence and properties. Yeah, identification doesn't. You know, I agree with you.
Yeah, like take a theorem, an unproved theorem, like the continuum hypothesis. That I won't be able to identify it because I can't solve the theorem, but it has its property of being true or false anyway. Right.
Exactly. So, I agree. But the point I was trying to make is, if something exists, it necessarily must have properties. No properties, it's non-existent.
Fine. Yeah.
That's what I mean. So, in Platonic issues, and I can ask the unfair question, describe its essence. They could come back and say, describe human essence. I don't know what it is, but I know what its properties are. And so properties reveal the essence or reflect the essence. I don't know the right word.
No, only essential properties reveal the essence.
Perfect. Essential properties. I like that, not accidental. Thank you. So essential properties reflect or reveal, right?
Well,
The
they're
essence.
constitutive of the essence. I mean, the essence of, so okay, here's another essential property that I may have, is being made of matter or something. But in addition to being essential, I can have an essential property being human, an essential property being made of matter. So if I suddenly become a gas, right? Weird idea, but let's say I suddenly poof and I turn into a gas. You might say, actually, it's not a case of you turning into a gas. It's a case of you stopping to exist and then a gas existing where you used to exist, because it's essential of you that you are made of matter, or I don't know, solid matter, or not a gas. Anyway, I suppose I'm mainly liquid, aren't I? It's a terrible example.
Right. No, I got you. You're making sense.
You know what I'm saying, right? So if you listed all of my essential properties, then that would be my essence. So my essence is constituted by my essence. If you like, that would be my essence. So when you're talking about an abstract object, because they don't have any accidental properties, all of their properties are essential. If you want to know the essence, what you're asking me is a full breakdown of all of the properties that an abstract object has. Well, very difficult to do. I mean, think about what you're asking me to say. What are all of the properties that the number 2 has? Well,
or some of them. I wouldn't say all, but I would say,
I gave you a list already. I said that it's not located in space, it's not located in time, it can't change, it's not dependent on anything else for its existence. Other things can instantiate those objects. That's a list of, I mean, you've got an idea of what I'm talking about. Right?
Yeah, but those are things that are what it's not. That's not what it is.
Well,
that's like saying this cell phone is not an elephant, and it's also not a horse. It's also not a bowling ball. It's also not a ship out in the ocean, but it doesn't tell me what it is.
But I satisfied the criteria of giving you essential properties, and I've given you a list of things. Well, because all properties of abstract objects are essential. Whereas you just told me, when you say my phone isn't a horse, I suppose maybe that is an essential property.
But that's what you were saying. But you were saying 2 is not this, it's not simply, it's not that. I was saying, but those are telling me what the negations are. I want the affirmations or positives. That's what I see. It's in my mind, when I think through these things, I'm looking for something a little bit more specific than the negations.
Property. The number 2 is the object that when I have 2 objects like here, these things instantiate the number 2. So the number 2 is instantiated by these things right now. That's a property that the number 2 has.
Right, that's tautologist, but right.
Well, it's not, because I could say that as an abstract object, it plays that role. Right, the number 3 doesn't play that role, but the number 2 does. So it's not completely uninformative to say that. I've given you a property that the number 2 has. There's not a negative property. There is an essential property.
Right.
So what else are you asking? Does that satisfy your question?
I'm at a fork in the road. Do I want to jump into more of that, or do I want to get back to the main thing we're supposed to talk about?
Well,
if we go one way, we're going to be another 20 minutes.
Right. Okay. And let's leave that there for the time being. I put a link in the side panel there of the PDF document, which you should read. I think you'll enjoy that. It's by some presuppositionalist philosophers, Anderson and Welty, John Anderson and Greg Welty. You know John Anderson?
No.
So he's the same type of Christian as you.
22 pages. Okay.
Paper's called The Law of Non-Contradiction, and in that they argue that the laws of logic imply that God exists.
Yes.
And their argument is roughly something like laws of logic are propositions. Propositions are intentional. Everything that's intentional is mental. Therefore, laws of logic are mental. And then you run off into they need to be sustained by a supernatural mind for them to always exist. Right. So that's like your argument, basically.
It's similar. I'd say it's my argument. Yeah.
I mean, it's wrong, because not everything that's intentional is mental, and laws of logic are an example of that.
But does it say that all things that are intentional are, or just these?
They don't spell it out properly, but it doesn't work unless you say that.
Okay. Don't have to look
Feel
at
free
it.
to
See.
have a look at it, yeah.
Yeah, I will. But I appreciate that. Okay.
So you wanted to look more at...
Okay. So get back around, because I'm enjoying this, but it's like we're not, I can see people who are interested in us settling the issue are going, when are they going to talk about it? So.
Well, so you want to get back to your argument. What I was saying to you previously was, I think you conceded it though straight away, that one of the main points, which was something like saying God or not God accounts for the laws of logic, isn't a logical truth, and it's therefore not an instance of a dichotomy.
No, I don't want to concede that, because I think I'm meaning it, trying to find my notes again, meaning it in a different way. Here we go. And that's what I want to talk about.
Okay, so I've been quite curious as to what you actually mean by the argument.
Well, let's see if I can say it.
Can you put it in premise, conclusion form? Like, what's the first premise?
Oh, heck. I don't know if I can. You want a syllogism?
Well, but an argument is a series of premises and a conclusion. And until you can do that, I don't think you have an argument. You might have an idea that could be an argument, but I don't think you can even say you have an argument until you've got those written down like that.
Okay. So God exists, or it's not the case that God exists. You and I both agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So when I say, for clarification, not the case that God...
You seem to have muted yourself somehow then.
Oh,
say
sorry.
That last bit again.
When I say not the case that God exists, then what I'm saying is, it's probably not going to come out right. Everything else besides God. We have everything else besides God, including, let's say, Platonism or strict naturalism or phenomenalism or whatever.
Wait. So now we're so this is one, we need to keep this straight. Are you saying theism? Well, because look, theism is true. It's a slightly different thing to saying God exists. And if you want to be really clear, there's a proposition which is true, which is that God, and taking the name God, like, again, just to refer to this particular God that you have in mind, that that God exists, is true or false, and it's true if that God exists, and it's false if he doesn't, right?
Yeah, I would say
that's not, you can't say that the opposite of that is Platonism or something like that.
Right. Yeah, and that's, I'm not trying to. I'm not saying it's Platonism, but it would include. It's either. How do I say this? Let's see. We either can account for and explain the laws of logic with the Christian God, or we can do it with something else besides a Christian God.
Right. Okay. So then the first premise
That's
is
what I'm saying.
Either God accounts for logic or something else does.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Right. Great. Wonderful. But now I want to know why you think that premise is true.
The laws of logic, I'm going to say.
Yes, so premise one, either God accounts for the laws of logic or something else other than God accounts for the laws of logic. Right. If that's premise one, then great. And then if that's how the argument starts, and then the second premise is it's not the case that something other than God accounts for logic, I would grant you that the conclusion validly follows, therefore God accounts for the laws of logic.
Right.
Right. So my only quibble with that, because the logical structure of that is disjunctive syllogism, no problem from me. My problem with that is, why is the first premise true? Sell it to me. Why should I think that that's true?
You mean
either God accounts for logic or something else does?
Because in the two options, it encompasses all possibilities.
Right. So let's go back to the example again. Either I've got 50p in my pocket or I don't. Explains why my car is broken down. Isn't true. Right. Even though there's only two options, either I've got 50p in my pocket or I don't. Neither of them explains why my car broke down.
Right. So I get you. So why should I got you.
So my point is, the first premise is either God accounts for laws of logic or something else does, and saying either God exists or he doesn't is irrelevant.
Gotcha.
Is irrelevant. It doesn't support that premise.
Gotcha.
What you need to do, let's make it clear, because if that premise is false, so if the premise either God accounts for logic or something else does is false, that means that nothing accounts for logic. And what that means is that logic is a kind of sui generis thing that just exists, and there's no more fundamental metaphysical level for it.
Right.
That could be the case. And not to appeal to authority, but that's Aristotle's view, more or less, is that, like,
what was that last statement? The what?
That's Aristotle's view, basically. Roughly speaking. It's kind of difficult to pin him down completely, but in Metaphysics book 4, I think, I can give you the precise reference, but he makes this argument where it's something like, if someone tries to ask why is the law of non-contradiction true, then he says something like, then they just show how stupid they are, because you can't have everything being explained in terms of something else, and nothing could be more fundamental than the law of non-contradiction. So it's the basis that bottoms out. There's nothing underneath that. It's like, it's not turtles all the way down. It's that turtles only as far down as the law of non-contradiction, and that's it. Stops there. And if that's true, then nothing accounts for that. There isn't a fundamental further level. And what I'm asking you is, your first premise, either God accounts for the laws of logic or something else does, is saying that Aristotle's wrong. And that's to say something accounts for the laws of logic. Why think that? I just don't see that there's an argument here as to why something must account for the laws of logic. They could be sui generis, bottom level features of reality.
That would be, something we could discuss about the bottom features and what all that is. So I took your example of the money. I guess P means pence.
Yes. Sorry, I'm talking in English.
No problem at all. So I rephrase it a little bit. Either the $5 in my pocket explains why my car stopped, or it does not explain why my car stopped.
No, you've rephrased it so that it's now got a different form to the way that it did in the first place. Because that's true, what you just said then.
Yeah, so either God explains why the laws of logic are universally valid, or it does not, or God does not explain.
Yeah, okay, so, well, so my criticism of your argument as it stood in the first place revolved around there being this ambiguity. So the first way of thinking about it, and it's difficult if you haven't read the blog post. I really do encourage you to read that, because I've made it as clear as I can. My blog post with the argument in it in the first place explains that there's two ways of understanding it. So the first one is what we just looked at then, where the first premise is either God accounts for logic or something else does. And that's not a dichotomy. And my whole point is that it's not logically true. And Aristotle's position is the position which is that it's false, right? And then, but you're now rephrasing it. Well, either God accounts for logic, or it's not the case that God accounts for logic. Now that is true. That is a dichotomy, and
that's what I'm trying to say.
That's false, right? Yeah, but if that's the first premise, then what happens is that the argument begs the question, because if it's a disjunctive syllogism, it goes P or not P. And then the second premise is the negation of one of those two options. So if I negate P, I negate the first option. So P or not P, then I have to affirm the other option, which was not P.
Right.
P or not P, therefore not P. I've begged the question. Right. So it doesn't work if you go that way.
Yeah, and I thought about that, and so that's why I think there's a problem in that, and I think might be a bridge problem in getting the thought across to the logic on the paper, because it's true, either God accounts for the laws of logic, or it's not the case that he accounts for the laws of logic.
Yeah.
Okay, so we would agree with that, or it's not the case. So when we get to the issue of atheism, where it's not the case of God, then it makes sense. God either accounts for the laws of logic or atheism, and that's what I mean.
No.
I know it's not logically correct in the statement, but I'm trying to get across the idea, because see, God accounts for the laws of logic, or it's not the case. That's true. It's not the case. Now I'm going to say atheism, because that atheism is not the case that God.
No. Either
yes,
God accounts for the laws of logic, or it's not the case that God accounts for the laws of logic. It's not the case that God accounts for the laws of logic. You've got a version of theism where God exists, but he doesn't account for the laws of logic.
You're going too fast. I'm sorry. I'm trying to listen to each word you're saying.
Okay.
You go a little bit slower.
Either God accounts for the laws of logic, or it's not the case that God accounts for the laws of logic, right? Zoom in on the half of that, which is it's not the case that God accounts for the laws of logic, right? All of the cases that half says, so it's not the case. Imagine it's not the case that God accounts for the laws of logic. That doesn't mean that God doesn't exist, right? It could be that God exists, in just such a way that he doesn't account for the laws of logic. So atheism isn't the same as saying it's not the case that God accounts for the laws of logic. They're not the same thing. All that half of the first premise, it's covering both cases, I agree. All possible cases. That's why it's true.
Right.
But it's not the same as saying atheism or theism. It's just the negation of God accounting for the laws of logic. So say there's some, I don't know, Zeus or something. No one ever thought Zeus accounts for the laws of logic. He hurls thunderbolts down. He has all sorts of like
Right.
adventures and does like deeds and stuff. But he doesn't account for the laws of logic in that particular version of theism. He's there, and the laws of logic are there too. They just nothing to do with him, right? So it's just not true that you're mistaking the dichotomy and of either P or not P with either God accounts for the laws of logic, either theism is true or atheism is true, and that you can't conflate those two things. They're just logically distinct. Does that make sense? I don't know whether that makes sense to you, but that's
yeah. I get you. I still see the truth in what I'm saying. I'm trying to argue it the way that's going to satisfy you, because you're like me with theology. Someone will say something, but I'm far more astute and precise than most people, so I have to explain certain details.
yeah.
I understand what they're saying.
Yeah. I would never dream of correcting you when it came to an issue of like theology or what the Bible said or whatever, right?
Maybe you could, though. I mean, I don't have all knowledge, but if you had said you thought I had a problem with something, I'd listen. Well, what do you mean? Then I'd compare it. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. So either existence with God accounts for the laws of logic, or a world without God accounts for the laws of logic. Existence without God.
Now we're back to the first problem again, which is that that's just like saying either my pocket has 50p in or it doesn't, and one of those two accounts for the laws of logic. There's no real reason to suppose that either of those does. Say the world's not got God in it.
Well,
why does that have to itself be?
I think they're wrong. Sorry, okay, the 50p in your pocket accounts for laws of logic, or they don't. They don't.
No. Now you've switched back again.
Okay, I'm not following how you mean by switch. Let me write this out. See what the switch is. Okay.
Right.
Seriously.
It's the scope of the negation. So is it that it's not 50p in the pocket, or is it that there being 50p doesn't account for logic? What are you negating? And there's on one of them, the negation is the whole proposition, and on the other one, the negation is just a bit inside the proposition.
Okay, we have to write it out.
Okay.
I'm not following you. Say it, I'll write it.
So the first one is either, let's see, let's be really clear about it. Either the fact that I've got 50 cents in my pocket accounts for the laws of logic. I'm waiting for you to type it, so let me know when you've typed it.
Okay. Let me do this. I'm going to repeat what you say with my speech program.
Okay.
For the laws of logic.
Right. Or it's not the case.
Or it's not the case.
I have 50p in my pocket accounts for the laws of logic.
That the fact that I have 50 cents in my pocket accounts for the laws of logic.
Exactly, right. And now what I've done
there, awesome.
Yeah. So what we've done there is the negation. It's the same fact each time that I have 50 pence in my pocket.
Okay, so I put it in there in the text. It says 50.5, whatever.
Yeah, right. So, but notice that it's the same fact in each case, right?
Okay, let me look at it.
I have 50 pence in my pocket.
Either the fact that I have 50 cents in my pocket accounts for laws of logic, or it is not the case that the fact that I have 50 cents in my pocket accounts for logic. Okay, let me think about it. It's either the case that it does, or it's either the fact that I have 50 cents in my pocket accounts for laws of logic, or it's not the case that the fact. It's not the case. It's not the case that the laws, or it's not the case. Either 50 cents does, or it's not the case that it does. I would say, but it's true that it's not the case.
That version of it is true. Yes, that's a tautology, and it's either P or not P. Got it, right? So that I would say, I just think of that as being, you've got one fact, which is, I have 50 pence in my pocket, and you're saying about that fact accounts for the laws of logic, right? And that's the statement we've got. The fact that I got 50 pence in my pocket accounts for the laws of logic.
Okay.
And then the negation of that whole thing is the fact that I've got 50 pence in my pocket accounts for the laws of logic. It's false. It doesn't do that. So it's not the case that the fact that I've got 50 pence in my pocket accounts for the laws of logic. Right.
So that's valid. It's true. We both agree it's true.
So it's like we've got this fact here.
Right.
And then I'm taking a negation and I'm just plonking it in front of the whole thing. Right. And I'm negating the entire thing.
P or not P.
Yeah. And then on the other way around is you're saying, and you can write this down if you want to, but either I've got 50 pence in my pocket or I don't.
Either I have 50 pence in my pocket or I don't. Hope that doesn't bother you if I do that and I'm repeating it. Just trying to do this quicker. Okay.
Right. And that one of those two accounts for the laws of logic.
All right.
So what you're saying is either
and one of those two accounts for the laws of logic.
50 pence in my pocket accounts for the laws of logic. Or me not having 50 pence in my pocket accounts for the laws of logic.
Oh.
Right. And what we're negating
wait. I think I get you.
I've got 50
I'm saying, okay, I think you're saying it's a very slight difference of affirmation versus not affirmation.
Yeah.
In that either I have 50% and oh man, yeah, this is okay. I'm starting to get what you're saying.
I'd be so happy if the penny dropped and you got what I was saying. It would be wonderful.
I think I get what you're saying because what you're doing, no criticism whatsoever. You're doing is really it's actually a compliment. You're thinking very precisely, but you've got several things attached to it as you're saying it. And I'm going, wait a minute, I don't see those things that you're attaching. I'm just saying this, having a problem. Then I just start getting their attachments, so to speak. That's what I'm starting to get.
So in the second,
I'm going to write it down.
The difference is that in one case, I have 50 pence in my pocket, and in the other case, I don't have 50 pence in my pocket.
Right.
And you're saying that one of those two accounts for logic.
Right. It wouldn't make any sense.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make any sense.
It might be that neither of them. It probably is the case.
Right.
That neither of them accounts for logic. Right. But on the other hand, what it's got going for it is that either I have 50 pence in my pocket or I don't. There's no third option, which is true, but it's irrelevant.
Right.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. And that's what's going on when you say either God exists or he doesn't. There's no third option. Therefore, either God accounts for logic or atheism accounts for logic. You're making this kind of 50 pence fallacy. You're saying that, I either have it in my pocket or I don't. Yeah, that's true. But it's not true that either one of those two things accounts for logic or that either of those two things accounts for logic. It might be that neither of them accounts for logic.
I see what you're saying. But I think there's a difference between the capacity of 50 pence in your pocket versus capacity of a being called God. And so what I'm saying, and without describing it yet, is 50 pence can't account for logic because it's not an abstraction capable thing, where God is an abstraction capable thing.
Yeah, I grant you that God could, like the theistic, I mean, certainly arguendo, I'll grant you that it's a sufficient condition.
Right.
It's enough to say that God exists. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you for a favor then. How would you word it from my perspective?
I don't know a way that it works. I don't think that it works.
Try. I figured you're going to say that. Let's try.
Well, but to do that, you need to give me some kind of idea that you've got of what the argument should be like.
Well, let me see if I can work this out then.
To one of these, because look, there's when you're saying, look, try though, just tell me that give me the way that works. That's supposing that there is a way that works. It might be that it just doesn't work, and for you to like, well, okay, but that I can't like give you the solution because I, like I said on the program before, if I thought there was a solution, I would all be a Christian. I mean, I would take this to be a proof, and I'm not closed-minded about this. Like I said, possibly off air beforehand, I think that the right way to go with these things, when it's logic, when logic's there, it's there. You can't argue with it. I would say this argument against someone who held my view. I would argue against someone who held the same view as me if it was wrong just as vigorously. I'm not going after you because you're a Christian. I'm just going after you because I think that there's a problem with the way that you stated it. If you think that there's another way of stating it, that you have to come up with it. I don't know a way of stating it.
Actually, I'm really liking this because I know some people that I can sit down with who are Christians. We can work through this.
Right.
And try and work through something because, fine, I still believe the argument's good ultimately, but maybe I can't prove it is.
Well,
But,
see, I think that the Anderson and Welty paper that I sent you is
Yeah.
about as good a version of it, of that
This
type
can
of
be.
argument as I've seen. And
Okay.
I don't think that works. And I think that the Banson thing about, well, the proof that God exists is that without him you couldn't prove anything, is just crying out for the first premise to be justified. Like, I can say that about anything. That doesn't mean that it's true. As a
Right.
transcendental, so look, a transcendental argument should say something like it should run something like this, like X is necessary for Y to be true, and Y is true, therefore X is true. Right? What you're doing is you're arguing from the truth of something to the truth of its preconditions, like it's necessary, the things that have to be there. And when Banson says, "Oh, for you to be able to argue about anything, that shows you that God exists," I want to say, like, well, why think that God is the presupposition for me being able to argue? Because you can't just say that it is and win the argument. You actually have to explain that. And when other people give transcendental arguments, like Kant, like Strawson, like Putnam, they go into the detail about why it works. And so for instance, Hilary Putnam has an argument about it's an anti-solipsistic argument, right? So the external world, you refer to things in the external world because there's this causal theory of reference. And so basically, blah, 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 long story short, it basically says something like, the only way to make sense out of me referring to the glass is if this causal theory is true. And if that causal theory is true, then there is a thing out there that I have a relationship with causally.
Right.
So there you go. And there's an argument about like any other theory of reference makes that relationship between me, the object I'm referring to, and the success of my reference is just magic. So there's an argument there, which is like the impossibility of the contrary. It's him saying any contrary version of this theory just makes it seem like someone's just going, "Oh, magic does it," right? And okay, if you could sustain that and make that point clear, then I'd give you that you've kind of, in some sense at least, argued for the impossibility of the contrary. But just saying the impossibility of the contrary doesn't actually do anything to persuade anyone of that.
Okay.
Something more. And I think that you're trying to do that. That's where I see what you're doing, because you'll regularly say things like, well, if logic was a product of the mind only, human minds, then if they all went out of existence, logic would go out of existence, or something like that. If it's just a linguistic thing, then there should be a French logic and a Portuguese logic and blah, blah, blah. And there isn't. So you're trying to engage with the other versions and show that each of the opposite views is impossible. But when we're running into this problem that we were talking about earlier, which is that, like, once you grant that it's not just one opposite view, but lots of different ones, you're setting yourself such a Herculean task of having to refute every single potential view that there could possibly be. Then you need a knockdown argument. I don't have the knockdown argument.
Well, I don't either. But even if
I
I
can help
did,
you phrase it if you said it. If you had one, then I'd help you. But like,
okay.
I'll also tell you if it doesn't work. And
Well, here's the thing. I think that the issue hinges around the nature of the laws of logic. So now I'm going to, take off the hat a little bit because I've been listening and not complaining about that, and not just, I really like what our conversation is. Sorry, this acquisition. I think that the issue comes around what these laws of logic actually are in their essence. This is why I'm so interested in the Platonic issues and the nature of the laws of logic. So logic, what I would say is this. Logic is a process of the mind. Socrates was a man. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Now, that's a syllogism that required my mind to work, your mind understand it. Now, maybe I'm just being overly simplistic, but that kind of logic absolutely requires a mind. We have premise one, premise two, and a conclusion, and it's valid. Okay, I'll call it. Oh, you only have about 15 minutes? Okay, good. I'm actually really enjoying the conversation. I really am, because you're sharpening me, and I don't get sharpened very often. Okay, so So if these laws of logic, okay, so the syllogism I just gave, so there it is. That's valid, but it requires a mind for it to occur. We don't find under rock A, under rock B, and then rock C, we see the conclusion. It doesn't work like that. So what I see the laws of logic is, what I see logic in the mind goes as a process that requires a mind. The syllogism, the Socrates syllogism, requires a mind, a human, at least in this case, a human mind. Not saying only a human mind, but just say a mind.
Wait.
Would you agree so far?
I'm not sure that I would. It requires a mind for what?
For recognition, explanation, and conveyance.
So if I'm to recognize it, then that's presupposing a mind. But let's look at the property that
yes,
argument
it does.
has. Yeah, okay, great, but that's fine. That's like saying seeing something presupposes a mind. Of course it does. But the point about the logical argument being valid is distinct from the logical argument being recognized as valid by somebody. Right? Obviously, being recognized as valid by somebody requires there to be somebody. But why does it require that there is somebody for it to be valid? Its being valid is independent of whether anyone recognizes it. So if
I don't know if that's true or not.
Well,
I don't want to interrupt you and disagree so much because I need to now a little bit, if that's okay, to be just a little bit more rude, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
Okay.
So why then? You're saying that it does. Why does it?
Because it requires minds to argue this, to make the statements. Logic is a process of the mind.
So the question is, does it require a mind for the argument to be valid?
Yes.
Okay, let's just be clear. We know we are talking exactly the same terms here. You know what validity means in a deductive argument?
That it's consistent within its premises, the conclusion. Doesn't necessarily mean it's true.
Yeah, so what it means is that if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true as well.
Right, but then there's sound argument. Yeah, but anyway, yes.
Right, sound argument means that the premises are true as well. Right, but for it to be valid, because you gave the argument about Socrates, the premises aren't true because Socrates doesn't exist, but it is valid because if they were true.
You said Socrates didn't exist?
Doesn't exist. So it's not now true that Socrates is a man.
Yeah.
Socrates was a man, but he's
but you understand the syllogism. All men are mortal. Socrates was a man, therefore Socrates was mortal.
Yeah, it's a valid argument because if the premises were true, when they were true, then
the true.
Conclusion
true and sound, right?
True. Well, no, it's not true that Socrates is a man. Is it?
I could get into the theological thing about the essence of humanity not being restricted to the mere physicality, and then therefore the continuation of the person exists, and then we could say, yes, it is. Why get into all these things?
Regardless, the point premise is about the validity of the argument. And the validity is, if the premises are true, the conclusion is true. Now, I don't see that property requires there to be a mind.
I don't know if that's true or not.
Okay, so why think that it's not true?
Well, I don't know if it is true, and I know you're going to say falsified to some degree, but not all things are falsifiable. Even the laws of logic aren't falsifiable. If you use logic to do that. So, but if we have a statement like all men are mortal, let's just say that it's kind of self-obvious, it's self-evident, but we have to presuppose law of identity. We have to presuppose certain facts about things. Now I'm going to lose my train of thought.
Well, if you're stating an argument, then you've presupposed all of the resources of the logic that you need in order to.
Right.
So, yeah, obviously I've presupposed the law of identity. That's right. In that case, because it's an argument that refers to individuals. Fine. Okay. So what? That doesn't mean that it has to be a mind either.
Well, here's the thing. This is where it comes down to. This is what I've thought about for a long time. Is logic is a process of the mind. Not all logic. You have computer logic, but that's designed by a mind. When we have a syllogism, a true syllogism, I tell it to you, and you say yes, that's valid. Then it's been conveyed. It's just whatever syllogism is. Doesn't make any difference. ABC syllogism. Well, that is a process of the mind. That process of the mind. That process requires a mind because it's a process of the mind.
Well, my mind goes through a process when I recognize it to be valid, but that doesn't mean that what I'm recognizing is valid. If I watch a film, what I'm doing.
I understand, but I'm presupposing that the syllogism ABC is valid. Just whatever syllogism it is, it's valid. And I tell it to you, it's a of the mind process. Your of the mind process just simply recognizes, I'm recognizing, I'm not creating it. I'm not the author of it. I'm recognizing that there are principles outside of myself, and you and I are opposite sides of the planet. And so, we're both, this isn't how it works. We're both reaching out, touching those syllogistic principles out there, saying, yeah, that's right, we recognize they're true. Okay. And so they have their validity out there. If the process is a mind thing for us, is it fair to infer it's a process of mind in the very nature of what these things are?
No.
That's the question.
And
Well, why
that's
not?
easily shown to be.
Okay, why not?
You're making an inference then, right? Okay, so a counterexample is any, commonplace example of something that you think about that isn't itself mental. So I'm watching a film.
Like what?
Well, I'm watching a film, right? And if you were to say, well, the process of watching the film goes on in my head. I'm thinking about the film as I'm watching it. Therefore, the film is the sort of thing that is mental. No, it isn't. The film is something that goes on in the world, and it's something, light that hits my eyes, and I then end up thinking about it. But you wouldn't say just because I'm thinking about it, therefore the thing I'm thinking about has the same nature as my
thought. That's conflating the object with the...
And you've done that with the logic case. Well, I think about logic when you talk to me about it, but that doesn't show. Well, I mean, it might be that it's conceptual, but you haven't shown that by pointing out the fact that we think about it.
Well, that's just it. See, I'm with you. I'm totally with you. Okay. It's just that as I'm driving to the station, I do a lot of thinking when I'm going to the station for some reason, up and back. My mind goes into it. I'm getting ready for mind things. And so I'll think about this kind of stuff. What is the nature of, for example, logic? What's the very nature? I'd like to get down to the essence. I'm like you, and I want the particulars defined, because I say to people, answers are in the definitions. The more precise your definition, the more precise your answers, and the fewer problems we have. That's what I believe. And so that's why, and this is a problem, that's why I said, what are the properties of these Platonic norms? It wasn't because I was trying to play a game. No, it's an actual serious question I have, because I like certain aspects of Platonism, but I think it presupposes God's existence. Another topic. But so what are the definitions? What are these things? And I don't think we can come to any real conclusions until these definitions are really worked on. But then what you can do, I'm not knocking you, you might say, well, there's this view, then there's this nudge over here of that view, the sub-view of the sub-view of the sub-view. And I don't want to do all of that. I want to find, well, let's just look at what these laws are. What are these laws of logic? We know that they're transcendent. They're not dependent upon space and time. We know that they're not in just your mind or my mind. Your mind is not the product of them. My mind is not the product of them.
But well,
that we can create them.
So far, we've been talking about positions that agree on that. But that's not to say that that's the only view that you could have. I mean, it's perfectly reasonable to think that in some sense, the laws of logic are dependent on what there is, just like physical laws. That's another view.
But yeah, that wouldn't make any sense. Physical laws or properties are measurable. The laws of logic are not.
They are. They're just measurable.
Different category.
Measurable is possibly not the right word, but yeah, there are a much higher level of abstraction than physical laws. But that's.
But they're different. The laws of acceleration, object accelerating. Okay, lots of properties are affecting that. We can measure it. All properties are measurable, but the laws of logic are not measurable. You can't, in a sense that you can't weigh them, freeze them, take a picture of them, calculate them out with mathematics.
Not so fast. I mean, let's say you came across something like, let's say you're, I don't know, in the future, been watching a lot of Star Trek Next Generation recently.
Of course I should be.
Right. So let's say you're in some kind of starship, and they come across weird anomalies all the time, right? Weird kind of space thing. And it looks like a contradiction somehow, let's say. It looks like it's both P and not P. And they might say, well, despite the fact that it looks like, I don't know. So here's an example. So this might be going off tack a little bit, but William Lane Craig has this Kalam cosmological argument, and part of one of his support for the premise that
everything that comes into existence or begins to exist has a cause.
Sure, yeah, and the universe came into existence is the
Right.
second
Therefore, it
premise.
has a cause.
Right. So part of the support for the second premise is just, humdrum, Big Bang Theory, everyone thinks that, don't they? But there's also this argument, which is that it couldn't, logically impossible for it to have always existed.
Right.
And that's something like an actual an existing
infinite.
infinity of things
Right.
couldn't exist, right?
Right. I'm with you.
And then he says, if it did, then there would be these absurdities, and they're like Hilbert's Hotel. You know Hilbert's Hotel?
Yeah. Yes.
Right. So it's an infinite hotel. It's full.
Floors.
You come up and you say, have you got a room? And the concierge says, well, we're full, but you know what? I'll tell everyone to bump up one room, and you can have room number 1. So it's full, but they can make a spare room. Right? It seems like a contradiction. It's full, but it's got a room free.
Right.
Well, let's say that in your starship, you come across this massive hotel, and you beam over and you say, what's going on here? They say, this is an infinite hotel. And you say, well, can I stay for a bit? Have you got any room? They say, well, we're full, but I'll bump everyone up. Oh, and now everyone's bumped up. You can have this. You can have room number 1. Now, are you going to say, well, hold on a minute. I remember listening to William Lane Craig on YouTube back in the 21st century saying that can't happen. Right? That's a contradiction if that happens. What are you going to say? Are you going to say William Lane Craig was wrong and there can be contradictions? Or are you going to say, some sense this is a magic trick. Someone's pulling the wool over my eyes here. I'm not going to give up the law of non-contradiction. I'm going to just say that even though it seems like a contradiction, it couldn't be, because the question really is, the question it seems to be is, do you live in a world where non-contradiction is a law, or do you live in a world where non-contradiction isn't a law? And that seems to be presupposing the idea that it's possible that non-contradiction could be false. Like there is possible worlds where non-contradiction is false. And if that's the case, then whether non-contradiction is true depends on the nature of the world that you live in. Right? So it's not measurable in a sense, but it does depend on what reality is like.
Yeah.
It's just a slightly different view again, right? But I mean, I'm just not sure I agree on your premise right at the beginning.
Except that, and I've talked to some people who've argued like that, and would I come back, not to be smart alecky, but so in other words, you got to posit a science fiction scenario that doesn't seem logically possible and say, see, so let's assume it is, which is why we're going to counter your logical argument. It becomes ultimately an absurdity to begin with, and I wouldn't argue like that.
It's not. I don't see what's absurd about it. I mean, you can say it's absurd, but what if it happened?
Well, but let's say it's like saying, what if a square circle happened?
It's not quite the same as that, because it's not clear that you've actually said anything coherent when you say square circle. But it seems to me that I've said something perfectly coherent when I say at what point did I say
there can't be an infinitely big hotel?
Why?
Because by definition, a hotel has a series of rooms, and the universe, by definition, encompasses what we are. And if it's infinitely big, the hotel would be the universe then.
Not necessarily, no. If the universe is infinitely big, then there can be a subset so if you take the
but then you can't
line,
have a subset of an infinite be equal to the infinite, because that's what happens.
Yes, you can. No, that's exactly what you can do on.
No.
Yes, it is. Do you know what the real numbers are?
Actual numbers, yes.
No, the real numbers as opposed to the natural numbers.
Okay, it's been a long time. Go ahead.
Okay, so the real numbers is so let's start with the natural numbers, right? The 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Whole integers, positive integers, ranges from 0 up to infinity, right? Right?
Yes.
The natural numbers is like
occurs in nature.
No, that's have any connotation like that. It's a mathematical concept. It just means that it's like all of those numbers where it's like 1.00001 or something like this. It's like extend so that in the first case you can only have whole numbers. In this case,
we see 1 rock and 2 rocks, not 2.83542 rocks.
Okay, so the natural numbers includes all of the fractions, all of those like decimal points. Then the natural numbers is just whole numbers, right? Yep. Now the difference between in one sense there's an infinite number of whole numbers, and there's an infinite number of natural numbers. But there's more natural numbers. Sorry, there's more real numbers than there are natural numbers.
Yeah.
Right? You can fit the natural numbers inside the real numbers, and there'll be more left over.
We're looking at them differently. Yeah.
But the point is that with the real numbers, you can have, in fact, it's provable that any subset, like, well, if you cut, not any subset, but if you just cut, say, how many real numbers are there between 1 and 2? The answer is there's an infinite number of them, right? So you can fit an infinite interval in between 2 points on the real number series.
I understand.
And that's like having Hilbert's hotel. If the universe is infinitely big, you can fit Hilbert's hotel into it. So you haven't managed to provide me a reason why you couldn't, in a spaceship, find Hilbert's hotel. It's conceivable that that's the case.
Yeah, I understand. But by definition, what a hotel is a located area. That's by definition of what it is. And the universe is different than that. And an infinite hotel would have to have an infinite number of rooms.
Yeah, an infinite
which means
hotel,
it would be infinitely large, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, it becomes one of the thing with the universe.
No.
And then by definition, it's not separate. Yeah. Because what is the universe? We have the definition of what the universe is. What is the universe?
So if the universe is infinitely big, like the real number line,
But is it?
I don't know. But like if you found so because you don't know one way or the other, you haven't shown me why I couldn't.
Well, I use the analogy of you have a line this big, and how many points are on the line?
Right,
an infinite.
Exactly.
Take half of that. Exactly. How many points are on that?
There you
how
go.
Can the half of the infinite be equal to the whole of the infinite? You have a problem with that. But it is. This is why some philosophers say actual infinites don't exist, because these kind of paradoxes.
That's not why they don't say that.
Some of them do. Well, I'm just giving it for the average Joe why these things are problematic. But there are philosophers who say actual infinites don't exist, where potential ones do. I haven't gotten into all their arguments why. You got to remember, I talk in a radio show. People call up, and I got to explain this. I'm at a Bible study. I got to explain this stuff. So my habit is to talk in these terms and these things that make things so, oh, I get what they're saying. And I'll say, this is why, and I'll actually say it like this. I'll do the line on the chalkboard, bang, bang, bang. This is why a lot of philosophers say there are problems here. It gets more complicated. I say, but this is one of the things. You see why there's a difficulty? They go, yeah, I see there's a difficulty. I just leave it at that. We're not talking PhD level stuff. Yeah.
To the extent that I'm a philosopher, I'm telling you that I don't see any problem with that.
Mathematically speaking, I could see how 1/2 of an infinite is equal to the whole of the infinite, but it's also paradoxical because you also have half being equal to the whole.
Right, but that might be what this universe is like. And just to say that you can't just say it's not like that. Well, it might be. And if you drive out in a spaceship and find something that looks like that, you're now stuck on saying, well, it might not be the case that this is an infinite hotel, right? But the question was really, if you were presented with something which seemed like it was a contradiction, would you just say, well, I have this kind of a priori commitment to there not being contradictions, therefore this can't be a contradiction? Or would you be able to say at some point, well, you know what, my universe at least contains at least one contradiction?
No, I can't accept that. No, I don't accept that that's a true premise. Because if we have contradictions that are actually true, then we have true contradictions, but a contradiction can't be true by definition. We have a problem.
Well, but then, there's...
Then we're validating the laws of logic to begin with. Then we're into this vicious circle. We can't get anywhere with it.
A triangle has angles that add up to 180 degrees, right? Internal angles that add up to 180
in a plane, not on a sphere, right?
But if you said by definition a triangle has internal angles that add up to 180 degrees, in a sense that's right. But the definition presupposes that a bunch of stuff that it talks about the world, and it's
you and I
contradiction.
You and I are not precise enough with each other right now. That's why it takes too long to go through all these sub-definitions of sub-definitions.
But with the contradiction thing, it's the same. You're saying, well, by definition, there couldn't be a contradiction. It's just like someone 18th century geometer saying, by definition, there couldn't be.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
I've got news for you, buddy. Space-time is curved, right? And you might just be like the 18th century geometer saying, well, there couldn't be a contradiction. Maybe there is. Maybe there is one in this world. Maybe it's not just possible, but actual. And so the original reason we got here was that you were saying that like the the laws of logic are these abstract things, and they're not dependent on what's real in the world. Well, up to that point, we've been talking about what Platonist and the theological position that you take, they agree on that much. But not everybody agrees on that. And you could say in some sense that what the logical laws depend on what there is. And that's, unfortunately, that's on the table as well. So we're going to have to wrap this up, but I want to recommend to you a position of metaphysical, almost metaphysical neutrality. I mean, in the sense that you can have your position, like maybe you have your experience that persuades you towards a theological commitment. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that that means that you can then infer all of these other metaphysical things. I mean, it's too difficult to say the nature of logic. It's too difficult to get drill down to it and have any certainty.
I don't know if that's true.
Well,
okay, because you're making an assertion there as well. But as far as the idea, because you said a lot of things I want to, I'd like to talk about, but if we find a law, or if we find an absolute statement of contradiction, because what's a contradiction? Contradictions deal with statements. We have the statement, I'm drinking a cup of coffee. I'm also not drinking a cup of coffee. That's a contradiction. It can't be true. Now, if we're going to say, well, it can be true that it's not true, well, then I'm not married to my wife, but I'm married to that cup over there, but also my wife, but not.
Well, it doesn't mean that another contradiction is true.
I know,
there might be only one contradiction.
But then we have to say that, well, what is it and how can it exist? But if we're going to say, I don't know if it exists, it might exist, I just say to people when we get to that kind of argument, I say, well, I prefer to argue from what we do know, not from what we don't know.
Well, but then you stop doing metaphysics altogether then, because none of metaphysics is what we know. It's all about what we know.
But we can know certain things about metaphysics by knowing properties of certain metaphysical things, and we can have discussions about those properties.
Name me one thing about metaphysics that you know.
That I know. Let's define metaphysics first, but you got to go.
Yeah, but it's I do have to go. Maybe we should continue this another day. But
we're going to have to.
Yeah.
Because I've learned with you, and I like this, is we both have to define. And we're not getting anywhere. It's why we take these tangents. We're not really discussing the issue at hand, which I have some notes here. I wanted to get into how to word things a certain way. I still believe tags is valid. I think with the issue between you and me, it's the wording of some concepts. And I mean no disrespect when I say this, but I've heard you say some things, and I don't think you're sound in some of your thinking. Now, I don't mean to be disrespectful. I just don't think some of your statements are correct. And
all right, well,
I forget what it was.
So then if we're going to talk again, then you can start with that then.
I don't remember what it was now. It was like one of those things. It's like, no, really. It's like, oh, yeah. No, I disagree with that because, and then, you kept going. I'm not
you can watch the video back.
Yeah,
come back to you.
I like doing that. Sometimes I don't, but I like just talking to you about it. It's more fun. But we'll figure it out. We'll do this again. Let's do this again.
Yeah, with the issue about whether or not it's just wording, that's not a fair representation of what I was saying to you in the first place. What I was saying to you is that the way that it was worded initially was ambiguous between two different logical forms. And what I was saying was that there's the logical form, which is either the 50 pence in my pocket accounts for the laws of logic, or it's not the case that the 50 pence accounts for the laws of logic.
That's valid.
As opposed to either I've got 50 pence in my pocket and that accounts for the laws of logic, or I don't have 50 pence in my pocket and that accounts for the laws of logic. That's not a wording issue.
That's the issue.
That's not a wording issue. That's a logic issue.
Right, I agree with you.
We do have to go into wording to get there. But
I agree with you.
It as an issue of wording, which is what, to some extent, is what happened on the Bible thumping wing that afterwards, is not fair, because I was talking about a logical issue, which, it comes along with a wording issue. It's not just a wording issue.
Okay, I hear that.
Couldn't let you wave it away. It's just a wording issue. It makes it sound like this is just trivial. It doesn't matter. Actually, it's logical, and it's the whole point of the argument. It's
I hear what you're saying. I do. And it takes us 2 hours to go one step forward.
Well, at least if we go one step forward, it's not a waste of time.
At least we've gone one step forward. Now, what you just said, the wording differently about the pence in the pocket, you said two different ways.
Yeah.
That's the thing it comes down to, is what
Yeah.
we're getting through. Yeah, that's it. So could you say it again? I'm going to repeat it or type it out. I'll keep
I
it.
tell you what, read my blog post, which explains it
It does that?
much more clearly
Okay.
than me saying it to you right now.
Okay, I'll do it.
I sent it to you before, didn't I? But I'm happy to send it to you again if you lose it or something. Just let me know, and I will send it to you again.
You're able to text my phone, aren't you?
I'm not able to. I can Facebook message you, which will probably pop up on your phone. But I don't have your phone number.
Here, try this. Just email me too. Right here. Just real simple.
Yeah, got it.
Everybody knows. I'm trying to tell everybody because I'm inundated with. I've already have 1,404 emails in that account. It was down from 4,000. But
mattslick@calm.org.
Try it. So yeah, just go ahead and do that, and I'll try and get to it. But I have to tell you, I need to go Wednesday, Thursday. I mean, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I have to go to Salt Lake City. It's another state, and I have to do a TV gig discussing some Bible inspiration stuff. So I may or may not even get to it right away. But Dave here has a friend that I think the three of us and some others that I know about would like to have a discussion about what we said.
Okay. The three of us, as in with me as well.
No, not with you around. I mean, sure, we'll have you around. Sure. I mean, others, we can talk about it. We're not trying to talk behind your back or whatever.
No, I don't mind. Do what you like. That's fine.
Yeah, and then we could come together and go, hey, let's get him on. Let's all do a little talk, because I know a guy who knows more about this stuff than I do. He loves this stuff.
Great.
And he could handle it better than I could. We can talk about it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't mind. Okay.
All right, good. I gotta go, or else I'll get in trouble. But yeah, so
with your wife?
With my girlfriend.
Is she there?
She's downstairs.
Oh, I want to say hi to her, but I guess get her up here and say hi.
No, not this time. Maybe another time.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Wait, we'll see you. Okay, Alex.
All right. Yeah. All right. Thanks for talking. We'll talk again.
All right, man. See you.
All right.
Goodbye.
Take care.